Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, August 22nd around here. We are only 2 days out from college football being back, and we have a great show for you today. We are going to break down all of the games for Week 0, mainly focus on Florida State, Georgia Tech, obviously, but a couple other games this weekend that I want to get you updated on, just give you a couple of tidbits to watch throughout those games. I'll give you my preview in the first part of the show. Then in the second segment, we'll get into all my picks for those games. Definitely want to dive deep into that. Then we have a very interesting conversation that Paul Feinbaum brought up. He said the Alabama dynasty is over. I tend to agree with him, and that kind of led me to the question of, are any dynasties going to be able to take place over the next little bit? And I'll kind of get into what I mean in the third segment. Then we have some lingering questions around the top 25 teams. We are nearing the end here, so we'll finish that up tomorrow. And then we have a ton of fall camp intel with a couple of teams actually adding players this last little bit that I want to get to. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen. Well, that is one way. I totally went back to my old script there, but that is one way you can use it. GSMCpodcast.net is still very much available. If you'd like to go over there and leave a question or a comment, you're more than welcome to do that. You can also use the Super Thanks feature that we got on the YouTube page over on the Sports Network. If you'd like to go over there, you'll see a little $ at the bottom of the chat, and you can utilize that to ask any question you want, give any comment you want. All of that stuff is obviously very helpful to you all, and definitely very helpful to us as well. So would love to have this to be a very interactive show and be as much y'all's as it is mine. So definitely would love that. So utilize that if you'd like to, and definitely will update you throughout the show if more people start to join. But let's get into Week 0. There is a ton of stuff to cover, and frankly, it's crazy that there's a ton of stuff to cover because there's only 4 games this weekend. But whenever you get to Week 0, there's all this excitement, there's all this hype going into the season. There's always going to be a lot to cover. There's always going to be a lot of energy going into this, and I could not be more excited for what we have in store this upcoming week. And there's so much stuff going on. Obviously, I just want to give you a quick update on where the schedule is right now. So, Florida State at Georgia Tech, that is the main event. It will kick off the college football season at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. Florida State is all the way down to 10.5, which we'll actually get to in the next segment. Why? That is a very, very interesting number for a number of reasons. But then we'll get into Montana State at New Mexico. This is one that you might not have your eye on too much, but the FCS team is favored in this one. Montana State by 11.5. New Mexico has a win total this year of 2. So definitely one to watch, where if New Mexico State doesn't win this game, there's a reality where they go just 0-12 this upcoming season. SMU heads over to Nevada to play a game at night. That one's going to be very interesting for a number of reasons. Jeff Choate, the old linebacker coach at Texas, now the head coach at Nevada. SMU coming into the ACC for the first time, want to get started on a strong note, and they're favored by 25.5 points, so should be able to do that. And then Delaware State heading out to Hawaii. I'm not sure why that's not there, but Delaware State is going out to Hawaii, and Hawaii is favored by about 38 points, and Delaware State missed their flight earlier this week. So I have a feeling Hawaii is going to be able to pull that one off. But let's go ahead and jump in here, and obviously we're going to start with the one in Ireland. This one last year was, I don't want to say a snooze fest. It was interesting to see Sam Hartman with Notre Dame playing Navy, but at the end of the day, I believe it was 38-0. So wasn't necessarily the game that everyone wanted it to be. And I think this year could just be a little bit different because we have 2 teams that are going to be going at it that have a lot of familiarity. I mean, these 2 teams are in the same conference. These 2 teams play pretty much every single year, and they're very different teams when you walk into this season. Obviously, Florida State introduces DJ, Malik Benson, Roydell Williams, so many different transfers that are going to have a huge impact on their team. Georgia Tech returns a lot of people, especially on the offensive side of the ball. It's pretty much the same exact group they had a year ago, and it was one of the best offenses in the ACC a year ago. It was the only one that had that averaged over 200 yards passing and rushing last year, so definitely something to watch as we get into this. What's the difference between adding a ton of new guys and keeping the guys that you had from a year ago? Is that a possibility that maybe Georgia Tech can pull the upset in week 0 because of that kind of disadvantage that Florida State has. But let's go for keys of the game real quick, and we'll start with Florida State, and it's really just getting DJ comfortable is the number one thing, and the way you do that is pound the rock. That's the way that they're going to win this game. The Georgia Tech defense was not good at stopping the run by any means last year, and it doesn't seem like it's going to get at least too much better. Definitely could improve a little bit, but overall, this is the way that Florida State's going to go about business. Probably the most of their season. Roydell Williams is going to be the lead back there, but Keziah Holmes is a very talented player. Cam Davis is someone that has absolutely exploded throughout fall camp and is just an absolute monster running the ball. Lawrence Tuafili is an absolute beast that was essentially their quarterback in the Florida game of last year. And then Jalen Lucas is outright electric. He's someone that can make a touchdown happen pretty much whenever he touches the ball. So you look at this running back room, it is one of the big time advantages for this Florida State team, where this might be the best room that they have, and they have a lot of really good rooms over there. So definitely something that will help DJ kind of get into the game is just run the ball, get confident on the ground, and then open those passing windows behind those linebackers. And then you got to find a wide receiver one. You got to make sure that you have someone that he can go to down in, down out, just find his number, throw it that direction, and feel confident that he's going to make a play. It sounds like it's going to be Malik Benson at least to start. Ja'Kai Douglas is another one to watch. Jalen Brown, Hakeem Williams are all guys that could absolutely fill into that role. But as of right now, it sounds like it's going to be Malik Benson. If he's going to make those plays, he's got to make them in this game. There's a defense that can be attacked, especially by elite long wide receivers, and if he's not the guy that is getting the ball often, or if none of these wide receivers are really getting the separation that they want, maybe it's a little bit of a worry area for Florida State going forward, where if you can't get separation on the outside against Georgia Tech, you're definitely not getting it against Clemson in those games that you very much need. And then finally, you got to be able to stop the run if you're Florida State. There's no doubt about that. Florida State has to be able to not only stop the run, but get to the quarterback, as Joshua Farmer is doing right there. But Joshua Farmer and Darrell Jackson are the guys holding it down after Braden Fisk walked off into the NFL, and they're facing a really good O-line for Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has kind of developed this really awesome O-line since Brent Key came over to be head coach. I mean, he was the O-line coach for Alabama during quite a nice stretch over there, so not overly surprising, but this is one of the best 15, 20 units in the country, and maybe they can hold their own. But if Florida State can stop the run, if they can get some push on that defensive line, it could be tough for Georgia Tech to get any type of traction in this game. But moving on to Georgia Tech, talking about what they need to do to possibly win this game, and the biggest one is just keep this defense off balance. The Florida State defense is bigger, stronger, faster, more talented than you are. That's just plain and simple. That's the reality of the situation. The goal is to make sure they don't know what's coming. Make sure you keep them off balance, and frankly, they do a great job of that. They did an incredible job last year, sprinkling in pass, run, RPO, all of the different concepts that you need, and making sure you get it to players like Eric Singleton right there, and make sure he can do special things on the outside. So Haynes King is obviously the key to this. He's got to make sure he's making the right decisions on time where it needs to go, and if he can do that, this Florida State defense, although incredibly talented, there are going to be holes to expose. There's going to be places where he can pick his spots, and as long as he can do that, it's going to be a very, very interesting game where maybe Georgia Tech hangs around for a little bit longer than people think they're going to. I also think Georgia Tech needs to get push on that defensive line. We talked about how good the Georgia Tech O-line is. Florida State might be just a little bit better. So Georgia Tech defensive line definitely needs to get some push. Bigger's the guy right there, is definitely the guy that is going to do that the most. He's the one that kind of is the linchpin of that defensive line, and definitely needs to be able to at least help them out in that respect. At least, get a little bit of a push, help out, make DJ just that little bit uncomfortable, and maybe stop a run on 2nd and 10, make it 3rd and 8, or something like that, to just make this game a little bit tougher for Florida State, a little bit more interesting. And if they can do that, then maybe they're off and running for Georgia Tech, who knows. But finally win the turnover battle. This is something that they absolutely are going to have to do, and frankly, with someone like Haynes King, who's so good at taking care of the ball, and then someone like DJ, who has some questions doing that, it's not necessarily crazy to think that this could be the case. I think Amari Harvey on that back end is a super, super important player, not only in this game, but throughout the year for Georgia Tech, and it's definitely one that Georgia Tech can pull off. It's one of those games that, they are definitely fighting an uphill battle when it comes to talent level, when it comes to coaching, all of that stuff is definitely going in Florida State's direction, but this is a team that's not going to make it easy for you. This is a team that is not going to get blown out because they haven't gotten blown out a ton since Brent Key took over, which is actually something we'll get into in the next segment. But overall, we have an awesome week 0 opener. We have a conference matchup. We have one that really does matter. We have a team that's looking towards a national title. We have a team that is just trying to play spoiler throughout the year and see where they land at the end of it. But both teams are building towards a really, really special season, and I think it's one of those that it's going to be really close. I don't really know how close it could be, but this is one that maybe you're overlooking a little bit, and you definitely shouldn't be as we get into this week 0. But moving on. Excuse me, I apologize. Yes, Georgia Tech and Haynes King are definitely a team that can make something happen this weekend that would be downright special. But now moving on. Montana State versus New Mexico at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. This is an FBS versus FCS matchup, and love that the FCS team is favored by 11.5 points. This is a very good team. Tommy Malote leading the way for Montana State, a very talented and guy that has just about every record you could possibly want at Montana State right now. And then Devon Dampier leading the way for New Mexico. Both solid teams, but overall, Montana State is one of those teams that is going to have plenty to say for the FCS championship. So definitely one to watch there. SMU is heading out to Nevada, and this is a very interesting matchup. You got Brendan Lewis on one side. He was a quarterback at Colorado before Dion showed up, and he found his way out the door. He is the starter over Chuba Purdy, who is the brother of Brock and the Florida State transfer, a very talented kid. So definitely huge props to him for winning that job, and he's going up against Preston Stone and the Ponies, and it's going to be a really, really interesting thing to watch. Nevada had a couple of players that came down from Texas with Jeff Choate when he left, and it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch this game. I think SMU is likely gearing up for a win, but let's see if Nevada can make it interesting, that's for sure. And then Delaware State and Hawaii will finish off the night at 12 a.m. pretty much as kickoff, so if you stay up, we can totally be best friends because you love this sport as much as I do. But Delaware State did miss their 10.5-hour flight to Hawaii. That's going to be an issue. There's no two ways about that, and they're not necessarily favored by any means in this game. Hawaii, is favored by 38 points in this one, and it's going to be very, very tough. Now, Pofele Ashlock, sporting the Colt Brennan hair, is all-time cool and definitely a player that is worth staying up for. So definitely one to watch there. I know it's a little bit under the radar and definitely a little bit late, but at the end of the day, they will still give you plenty of good football. So that's week 0. There's only 4 games to break down, so I wanted to get to all of them. Obviously, going forward, it'll be a little bit different of a format. We'll spread it out over more days and get a little bit deeper into some of the games. But as of right now, we got the 4 games, and I'm going to enjoy every single one of them. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we'll make all our picks. We'll get into this a little bit deeper, give you some stats to watch throughout those games, and then I'll give my picks for the line for those games and then the over-under for it. So definitely stick around for that, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of a week 0 preview, just got into all the games, gave you little tidbits to know as we head into it. But now it's time to make some picks. We got to get into what I think is going to happen this upcoming weekend, and we are going to touch on every single game. This obviously will not be the case down the road because there's not enough time in the day. But at the end of the day, I do want to get into all of these because they deserve their little spotlight if they're playing on week 0. So let's jump into this, and we will start with the game that likely is the least interesting to you. Actually, maybe it's not. Maybe this one is not the least interesting, but let's go ahead and jump into this. Montana State is favored by 11.5 over at New Mexico State. Definitely a very interesting one, as Montana State is the FCS. New Mexico being the FBS, you usually see the difference. But at the end of the day, this is a very talented Montana State team. Tommy Malloy leading the way. He is top 10 in school history in just about every stat you could possibly imagine, whether it's passing yards, passing touchdowns, wins, starts. It's all him. He's very, very talented. Coming off a team that went 8-4, returns a ton. This is absolutely a team that is going to be in the FCS title conversation at some point this upcoming year. So definitely will be a fun team to watch, just to get an idea of how good the FCS ball really is. And then over on New Mexico's side, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the FBS, plain and simple. They have a win total of 2 going into this year, and realistically, if they don't win this game, there's a reality where an 0-12 season is on the table for New Mexico. Now, they do have some really fun players. I think Devon Dampier is a very interesting player that can get out on the edge and make some really fantastic things happen, but at the end of the day, the defense is not all that great for New Mexico. Montana State is coming off a year where they average 40 points a game, so I'm not necessarily going to overthink this one too much. I think Montana State likely takes this one by more than 11.5, maybe 14, 21 points, but I do think some points are scored. I do think we get a little bit of an interesting kind of week 0 over. You usually get some unders early on in the season, but I think Montana State's going to come out firing, and New Mexico is going to have plenty of openings for them to fire into. So definitely a game that is going to be, at the very least, really interesting to see the difference between FCS and FBS and see maybe sometimes those FCS teams are just a touch better. So definitely something to watch there. But moving on to Hawaii, they are favored by 38 points over Delaware State. This is going to be a tough one for Delaware State for about a million different reasons. Obviously, they are outmatched. They are the FCS team, and they are not favored in this one against the FBS team. And they missed their 10.5-hour flight to Hawaii because of some bus mishaps. So they're not necessarily, they're fighting an uphill battle. Let's just put it that way. It's going to be a very, very tall order for them to be able to figure that out. But also, Delaware State's defense was outright bad a year ago. They went 1-10. They allowed about 40 points a game. They scored only 18 points a game. Hawaii didn't necessarily roll last season, going 5-8, not necessarily the craziest team in the world, but at the end of the day, I think this one has a chance to get a little bit ugly early. The jet lag takes over. This one's a little bit ugly, but at the end of the day, I know 38 is a trap. I know giving me Hawaii minus 38 is supposed to make me take Delaware State. I'm going to take Hawaii. I think this is one that all of the cards are stacked against this Delaware State team. It's impossible for them to get off a 10.5-hour flight after 36 hours, essentially, and then play this game. Is going to be out of this world tough. So I do think Hawaii wins this one by a ton, and kind of, tips the scales back towards the FBS and the FCS FBS battles. And then moving on, we have an SMU game that is a little bit interesting. SMU is favored by 25.5 points, so I'm not necessarily expecting a nail biter, but this Nevada team has a couple of players that I really like. I think Brendan Lewis is one of those guys that has a ton of confidence in this offense. He can stretch plays if you really need him to. This guy can absolutely make some plays that you very much want him to in this game. On the other side, you're obviously watching SMU. You want to see what SMU is as they head into the ACC. They were really good last year. I expect them to be really good again this year. When you talk about Jalen Knight and LJ Johnson, Kamar Wheaton, it's one of the best running back rooms in the entire SEC. And I think this is a team that has every ability to do really remarkable things this upcoming year. So I like this Nevada team. I think they're going to develop into a good team throughout the year, but this is just too tall of an order. I think SMU wins this one. I think they win this one pretty comfortably by about 28 points, probably pulling away a little bit in the third and fourth quarters, but at the end of the day, this SMU team, I think, is ready to roll and might just be able to run for about 400 yards this game. So I do think the over is going to hit, though. I think Nevada will be able to make just enough plays to make this one get over that 56.5 moniker. But now let's get to the main one. Let's get to Florida State. They're favored by 10.5, and that is a big-time number to look at as we get into this. The over-under is 55.5, but there are some stats we need to keep in mind. The line has moved about 3 points from 13.5 to 10.5 from open. So very, very interesting. And it goes over that number 13, which is a huge number when it comes to college football betting. Because obviously, whenever you go over a number that is pretty attainable for an offense like 13, 14, 7, 10, it gets a little bit more sketchy. And that is a big time moniker to watch because say it drops to 9.5 before kickoff, maybe you don't want to take it anymore. And that's something I'll get into a little bit later on. But Georgia Tech as an underdog last year was incredible. They were 7-2 as an underdog last year. They were 6-2 against the spread in conference games. But on the other side, you have a guy in DJ that in his 40 starts has 30-10, over 8,000 passing yards, 57 touchdowns, a very efficient guy. And then Florida State does not lose a lot of these games. Georgia Tech has been 1-5 in their last 6 season openers, while Florida State have won 12 straight games against ACC opponents. So doesn't necessarily look too great as of right now. But as you made a great point made here by Who Bangin' Sports Talk, definitely something that I wanted to get into, not Brent Key, but I know what you're saying. Brent Key has done a great job of getting his teams up for these games. You know, these are the games like that UNC game that they were able to win the last 2 years that not a lot of people were picking them in. That Miami game that they fought down to the absolute last second and were able to pull one out there. This is a team that is not going to get blown out. This is a team that is going to become prepared every single game, and it's going to be really tough to convince Brent Key that they are not going to be ready because this guy is as intense as they come. So this is a game that has a ton going into it. You know, Georgia Tech is a team that has the ability to attack this game. You know, the offense is really, really good. The offense is one of those things that it's going to keep moving. You know, the Florida State defense is going to be good and they're going to be able to tackle and all of that stuff. But if Georgia Tech can get 4 yards every single play, they will live with that because it means you are running the clock down, you are wearing this defense down, and more importantly, you're keeping some of the great playmakers on the other side off the field. And I kind of agree with you there. I think DJ is one of those players that I'm walking the season and I know the ceiling is there. I know there is ability with this quarterback, but man, I have questions about what he can do on a team that has national title aspirations. This isn't a team that is what he's walking into and saying, you know, just play good football for a year and then we'll get really kicking in 2025. This is it. He's got to be able to play really elite football, and if he doesn't, there's going to be a lot of mad Florida State fans. So this is one of those games that I understand we look at and you say Georgia Tech against Florida State. It's going to be Florida State. Don't even worry about it. You might as well not even turn it on. This is a different Georgia Tech team than people are used to. I can promise you that. Even a different Georgia Tech team than we saw a couple of years ago. So I do think this is one of those games that, you know, a couple of years ago, I would totally be on board with you. I would be saying Florida State would be win by 21, 28 points, and this would be one that we would look back on and say, why would we think this would be remotely close? It's going to be really close. It's going to be one of those games that's confusing, that has a lot of variables, that has travel involved, and it's going to be an absolute fight to that fourth quarter. The question is, who makes those winning plays? And frankly, I don't have a good answer for you because I know what Haynes King is. I know what he is in this offense. I don't know what DJ is in this offense. So while I think DJ at his best is likely the better player, I think Haynes King right this second might be the better player and might be more able to make those plays down the stretch of the game to win it. So I'm not going to pick Georgia Tech. I'm not getting out of this world. I'm not losing my mind here, but Georgia Tech's going to cover that 10.5. Georgia Tech is a team that is not going to get blown out in this game because Brent Key will not allow it. He will somehow, if he has to suit up himself, he will get out there and he will make sure that that team does not get blown out because that's not what his team is. His team is much more hard-nosed. They show up to every game thinking that they can win, and especially in a number of games that you would go in and think Georgia Tech doesn't have a shot. They've come and played really good football. Go back to that Georgia game a year ago where, yes, some things went bad for Georgia, but Georgia Tech played a really good football game, both on the defensive and offensive sides of the football, and played that game down to the wire. So this has become kind of their moniker. I think it's going to happen again. Now, if that drops below 10, then we're having a little bit different of conversation. Maybe I would go Florida State's direction, but as of right now, Georgia Tech is that team that I think this one's going to be down to the wire. I don't necessarily think there's going to be a last-second field goal to win it, although not necessarily out of the question. But overall, I do think this is something that is absolutely going to be a really tough fought, very interesting game, and I think we're going to get that over 55.5 that everyone very much wants. That Florida State offense is going to be able to attack this Georgia Tech defense. The run game should be plenty to be able to score enough points for Florida State to likely get out on the winning side of this, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a defense in this country that can fully stop Georgia Tech. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but at the end of the day, they find openings in pretty much every single defense, and it's all the credit in the world to someone like Buster Faulkner, who can do just remarkable things calling plays, and he will be a head coach this time next year, I can promise you that. So it's one of those games that you go into week 0 and sometimes they're a little bit benign. Sometimes you get that Notre Dame Navy game where, yes, it's interesting, yes, it's two big time brands, but it's not necessarily a game that you think is going to be remotely close. It's not necessarily a game that I went into last season thinking we were going to see anything incredible. Now, I did think Jaden Greathouse was going to be the best wide receiver in the country there for a second, but at the end of the day, I do think Georgia Tech is going to be able to keep this one close. I think we will get one to start the season that will kind of show what the season's about, which is a little bit of chaos, a little bit of uncertainty, and definitely some teams that you do not expect to win these games. So it's going to be awesome to watch this one. I think Georgia Tech keeps it close. I think Florida State wins, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than some people expect. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about what Paul Feinbaum had to say about the Alabama dynasty. He said it is over, and frankly, I agree with him, but it led me to a question about dynasties in general going forward. Is it something that just we will never see again? So I'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, we just broke down all of my picks for the Week 0 slate, a ton of really good games, but obviously Florida State Georgia Tech is the one that we're all looking forward to. But also a great fun fact over here, Florida State staying an extra night to do some sightseeing. Maybe that Boston College game just got a little bit more interesting, but we will obviously break that down once it gets there. But let's get into segment 3 here, and let's talk about what Paul Feinbaum had to say about the Alabama dynasty. He was on, frankly, I cannot remember what he was on, but he was on a TV show, and he was talking about Alabama. He was talking about going into this season and Kalen DeBoer and all of the changes going on, and they asked him a very simple question. Is the Alabama dynasty still alive? And his answer was fairly simple. He said it was dead before Nick Saban left, and now that he's gone, it definitely is. So it's one of those conversations that I've touched on this a little bit over the last little bit as we've kind of gotten into Bama. They're going to take a step back. And frankly, they were taking a step back regardless of who the head coach was. It could have been, Kalen DeBoer or Nick Saban or Bill Belichick. They were taking a step back. I can promise you that, because there's just too many more variables to add to this conversation, whether it's the 12-team playoff or it's, expansion in conferences. It's doing away with divisions, which gives you some tougher games against Georgia and some of the other teams that you didn't have to face in the past. All of these hurdles we're going to get any single coach. Nick Saban is a fantastic coach and has overcome odds every single which way, but at the end of the day, it was going to get tougher. They were going to lose more games every single year, regardless of if Nick Saban was the head coach or not. So I do agree with him. I think the Alabama dynasty is over. I think we are on the other side of it now. It could start right back up with Kalen DeBoer, who knows, but at the end of the day, they haven't won a title in a number of years, and they've been, on the wrong side of history for a little bit. So I do think it's over technically, but at the end of the day, I don't know if anyone's going to be joining them anytime soon. I think Georgia has that obvious opening right now because they've won 2 of the last 3. They're heading into the 12-team playoff. If they win this year, that's 3 of the last 4. You can absolutely call that a dynasty, and frankly, I would too. The question is what happens after that, because you have a 12-team playoff. There's more variables. There's more teams that are going to be at the party every single time, and I think it's one of those things that we kind of get a little bit caught up in all of these specific teams. Alabama, we can always count on them to make all of those plays. Georgia, they're above all doubt. They're always going to make those plays and be in that conversation. And I tend to agree with you. But at the end of the day, you can't add more games to the schedule. You can't add more teams to that party, and you can't add more variables to all of the different things around the game and not expect a lot of these things to become tougher to do. This Georgia team this upcoming year absolutely could win a title and absolutely could win 3 of the last 4 and be looked at as a dynasty and go into 2025 as one of the favorites to win another title. But then it's going to get a lot harder to do that. It's not going to be a layup every single year to just walk in and say, we're going to be in this conversation every single year, no matter what. So that made me kind of wonder, are we just done? And I think to kind of fully understand what I'm saying here is you got to fully understand what Nick Saban did. He won 6 national titles over 14 years at Alabama, and he had 3 losses since 3 losses one time since 2009. That is outright insane. And he didn't do it, doing one style of football the entire time. He adapted with the times as well as anyone. Because at the beginning of it, it was Mark Ingram. It was Trent Richardson. It was running in between the tackles and what they called murder ball down in Tuscaloosa. And they kind of wanted to get back to that last year. And frankly, I think they might just this year. But then you saw Oklahoma. You saw Baylor. You saw West Virginia. A lot of these teams start to spread the ball out, and people started to listen. So there was definitely a change. There was much more passing. You had to push the ball downfield if you wanted to be successful, and we saw a little bit of a lull there for whether it was 14, 15, 16, where it was just a little bit tougher. They were able to ride Derrick Henry to a title in 2015, but at the end of the day, they did have to adjust, and then Tua walked in the door, and then Mac Jones walked into the door, and then Bryce Young walked into the door, and they had no problem adapting. They got elite wide receivers on the outside, and they've become a team that when you are an elite wide receiver, it's hard not to look in Alabama's direction. So it's one of those things that what he did is out of this world. What he did should not have been able to happen. Like physically, it should not have been something that he was able to do, because the SEC should have been there should have been more teams that were able to take them down. An LSU team that every year should have been in that conversation a little bit more than they were. Auburn is another team that matchup probably should have been a little bit more even-keeled. There was just a guy on the sideline that made everything unfair. That was so dominant, that was so intense, that was so aggressive, that he was going to make things incredibly tough for whoever he faced. Even a team like Georgia, who dominated college football over the last couple of years, they didn't dominate Nick Saban. He was 5-1 against them, so he did not necessarily hurt for beating Georgia at the end of the day. So I think when you look at all of this stuff, the hurdles that you have to go over is just absolutely insane. Whether it's the 12-team playoff or conference realignment, or probably the biggest one, which is the NIL has to work 24/7, 365. If you have a lull for 2 weeks in your NIL workings where you're just not putting that much energy into it, you're not recruiting the way that you want to, it's going to crumble. And it crumbles very quickly because there's a number of other teams that are ready to take your spot. There's a number of other teams that are ready to spend a little bit more money than you. And that kind of opens a door where maybe there's the passing of baton just way more often in this sport, where maybe Georgia wins the title this year and they're the best team in the country, but then a team like Tennessee or a team like Auburn or a team like Texas or USC or Ohio State, whoever, takes that baton from them the next year. And then following next year, where maybe we add even more teams to the playoff, you have a totally different team at the top of the mountaintop. And obviously this is something that is a little bit of a double-edged sword in a number of different ways, where when you look at college football over the last 14, 15 years, it has become more popular every single year. And the reason for that, in a lot of ways, whether people like to hear it or not, is Nick Saban in Alabama, because frankly there were a lot of people watching them wanting them to lose, and that was the reality of their Saturday. That was the way that they went about business. It didn't work out for them very often, obviously, but at the end of the day, it was one of those things that brought in a lot of viewership, and you wonder if one year it's Georgia, and then one year it's Michigan, and then one year it's Texas, and one year it's USC, would that be a little bit harder for those casual fans, those fans that don't necessarily tune in at all times of the year for college football content? Would that kind of take them out of it just a little bit because it's too much to keep track of? You know, it's always the argument I hear, we always know who's going to win the title, we always know who's going to be in the conversation. Maybe it would flip to there's too many teams to keep track of, there's too many teams in the conversation. But at the end of the day, that's kind of the big disconnect between a lot of people, where people will say college football is getting worse. People will say college football is suffering. And then someone across the room that doesn't really watch college football will say, well, the viewership numbers are going up. That has to be the moniker for how well your sport is doing. It is not. The best thing about the sport is the parity. The best thing about the sport is the uncertainty, and it's definitely something that I see developing more and more as we get deeper and deeper into this NIL era. I mean, we just saw a 5-star offensive lineman commit to Georgia Tech. That doesn't happen 3 or 4 years ago, and NIL played a big role in that recruitment, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that Georgia Tech can pull in some of these guys that used to just not even look in their direction, not even pick up the phone when they called. Now they'll listen, and that's a big-time deal, not only for those kids because they get a little bit of money that, frankly, they should have been getting for quite some time, but also you have more teams that are going to have to thread a little bit of a needle. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch, but overall, I mean, we talk about that Alabama dynasty, and it was insane. It was truly out of this world, and I think it became so mundane. It became such a part of the culture and the fabric of college football that we didn't really question how incredible it was. We didn't really question how insane it was because they just kept doing it like it was nothing. But the reality is, pulling off what Nick Saban pulled off is absolutely insane in a BCS or 4-team playoff. In a 12-team playoff, it might just be downright impossible. So I guess when I'm talking about these dynasties, and you know, we have so many incredible ones to look back on throughout the history of college football, whether you want to talk about USC in the 2000s or Bama in the 2010s, you can go back to Miami, you can go back to Nebraska for a number of decades there. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things that maybe with all the changes to the postseason, maybe with all the changes to NIL and the transfer portal and all of that stuff that is making it just a little bit more level around the playing field, maybe that creates a world where dynasties are just a thing of the past. Frankly, I would not mind that one bit. I know there are some people that would not necessarily love that because people love to kind of hate on that big-time team, but at the end of the day, it would be an incredible sport to watch if every single season you were going in thinking there are about 16 teams that can win it, and someone else is going to lift the trophy than lifted it a year ago. So I think it's one of those things that's going to be really, really awesome to watch, and maybe those dynasties that we've become a little bit accustomed to, you know, Alabama passing it off to Georgia or passing it off to Clemson for a little bit there, maybe that's a thing of the past. Maybe it's just you pass it every single year and it keeps bouncing around, which I'm firmly in favor of, but I understand that there would be some people, especially Alabama fans, that would not be too happy about that. But let's move on. Let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to break down some of the lingering questions for the top 25 teams. We're starting to wrap this up. We're getting towards the end of the top 25, but we're going to dip in a little bit past the top 25 tomorrow. But definitely check that out tomorrow. But let's get into some lingering questions right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about dynasties in college football and how maybe they're just a thing of the past. And yes, I cannot wait on the Saban era untold stories. Man, that is going to be incredible. And yes, we're firmly could be in the center of a Kirby Smart dynasty. The question is that the last one that we will see? But it'll be definitely a really interesting thing to watch over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So definitely will be awesome to watch there. But let's get into some lingering questions around the top 25 teams in the country. We have jumped through, I believe, the top 16 at this point, and then we're going to get into another 6 upcoming right here. So let's start with the Oklahoma State Cowboys, and the biggest question firmly is, can Alan Bowman avoid the mistakes? This has been a problem for him throughout the entirety of his college career, and the good news is he has one of the best offensive lines in the country, maybe the best. Ollie Gordon is one of the best running backs in the country, maybe the best. I think the ability on the outside at the wide receiver is really good, and it's very veteran, which is maybe even more important, frankly. But Alan Bowman is a turnover guy. Last year, he had 13 passing touchdowns. He had 12 interceptions. And I understand they made it to the Big 12 title that year, and I understand there were a number of things that happened along the way that kind of went Oklahoma State's direction, but that can't be the case this year. If they want to be successful this year, that just plainly cannot be the case, because they're going to see a lot of stacked boxes. They're going to see a lot of 8, 7, 6 guys standing there waiting for Ollie Gordon to get that ball. And when he does, they're going to absolutely swarm. So he's going to be fine. Ollie Gordon's going to be able to put up numbers. I'm not arguing that, but they have to be able to scare teams down the field. They have to be able to spread teams out, and they have to be able to open up running room for Ollie Gordon to go to work, because that is the crux of this offense. So overall, I mean, you look at this team, and it's a really good team across the board. They have so many guys coming back. They have so much in place to really make a run at a possible college football playoff berth. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of things that he just has to do better. Now, he's going to be doing plenty of that, so that makes it a little bit easier for sure. But he's going to have to cut the interceptions. Maybe, by 3, 5, maybe even cut them half and go down to 6 interceptions. He's got to up that completion percentage that was all the way down, I believe, below 60% a year ago. He's got to bring that up to like 63, 64%. Then you can make a difference. It doesn't have to be leaps and bounds. It doesn't have to be, making every single play for your team and totally airing the ball out. He's just got to make sure that using Ollie Gordon isn't the only option on this team. And if a team can back up into coverage and pick him off every couple of drives, they're just going to have a really tough time keeping up in this league that is remarkably competitive. Moving on to Kansas State, the question I have is, was kicking Will Howard out the door a mistake? Because we all know the story at this point. Avery Johnson came in late last year, played incredible football, was an incredible athlete, especially running the ball, and then Will Howard hit the transfer portal, found his way to Ohio State. He is now the starter. The question is, do they want that veteran presence? Did they miss out on having this guy in that room and making sure that they had someone that maybe this Avery Johnson thing doesn't go quite as smoothly as they want it to? Now, I'm having a hard time arguing this because I don't think any Kansas State fan is worried about it, and I'm not worried about it one bit, because I think Avery Johnson is downright special, and I think he's going to do a number of really good things. That being said, he does need to take a big-time step forward passing the ball. That was the place that Will Howard was pretty comfortably better than him a year ago, and Avery Johnson's definitely got to take a step forward there. Got to get better at completion percentage, got to be just more consistent delivering the football. So I do think it's one of those things that I don't know if it's really going to cause too much of a problem, but there's a reality where maybe Avery Johnson goes down with an injury, or maybe Avery Johnson just isn't playing all that great late down the stretch, and you need a guy that has been in those scenarios to come in and make those plays. Now, Will Howard's not a guy that was going to wait around by any means, but it is something that maybe is something to watch as we get a little bit closer. They're still trying to figure out the backup over there, so if Will Howard was there, it wouldn't necessarily be too much of an issue. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a big-time hypothetical that I don't think we'll be questioning at the end of the year, but always something to keep in mind. Moving on to Miami, the biggest question about this team is not the transfer portal guys, it's not the talent of this team because it's absolutely ridiculous. Can Mario Cristobal coach the games that he needs to coach? Can he win those big-time games down the stretch of a season? And it's going to fall on him in a lot of ways. When you look at those games towards the end of the season, in the conference championship, in the playoff, there are a lot of tactics that are put into play. There is a lot of chess matches that are put into play between those two coaches, and in a lot of ways, the coaches are the ones that win those games. Mario Cristobal has been downright bad in a lot of those big time games and a lot of those moments that you're going to be in throughout the season if you want to do what you're capable of doing. So I think it's one of those things where if you're up 4 with 4 minutes left and you have to make some time management decisions, or you have a fourth down maybe on your own 45-yard line with 2.5 minutes left, you have all 3 timeouts. Do you punt the ball away? Do you go for it? Those are the type of decisions that he has to be able to make down the stretch of this season, or they're just going to be a little bit disappointing this upcoming year. Now, another part of this is he just got to lean on his coordinators more. He has 2 really, really good coordinators in Al Golden and Shannon Dawson, and trust them. Believe that they are going to make the right decision, and I understand you got to get involved from time to time, but at the end of the day, it felt like last year he just had his hands on it just a little bit too much at times, especially late in that Georgia Tech game. So I think it's one of those things that Miami has everything on the table this upcoming year, including a national title, but the coach could be the thing that holds them back if he doesn't get some of the issues that he's had in the past under control, and definitely something that will be fun to watch down the stretch of those big-time games for Miami, even in week 1, frankly. But moving on to Texas A&M, the big question I have here is kind of twofold. Can Connor Wegman stay on the field, and then can he hit a ceiling? Because the way that NFL scouts talk about this kid is out of this world. They talk about this kid as he could be a number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft this upcoming year, and I'm having a hard time disagreeing with them. I know we have not seen a ton of that kid. I know that he has not necessarily played the amount of football that you would love to see from him, but man, the arm talent is ridiculous. He can fit balls into windows that are just remarkable, and he's one of those guys that throws with remarkable anticipation. So I understand, it's not necessarily a full case study. It's not easy to get an idea of how good this kid is after a couple of games starting and then getting injured here and there. But the talent is off the charts, and it comes down to a number of different things of can he hit that ceiling, whether it's the play calling of Colin Klein or the O-line getting a little bit better than it was last year, because that played a part in his availability throughout the year. The wide receiver depth is something that they're a little bit worried about, and then obviously him just staying on the field is the biggest thing of this. But if he hits the ceiling, this is not a team that can just win 9 games. This is not a team that can just play spoiler in the SEC. This is a team that can go to the playoff. This is a team that could possibly go to Atlanta and play for that SEC title. Now, you're walking a little bit of a tightrope, obviously, with a new head coach, but imagine if Mike Elko walked in there and took them to the playoff in his very first year, the amount of A&M fans that would be just ridiculously mad at Jimbo Fisher that aren't already ridiculously mad at Jimbo Fisher would be off the charts. But this is one of those teams that is remarkably dangerous, and you look across that roster, it's one of the most talented in the country, and that quarterback is right at the center of that. Very much like this kid, and I think he's going to be one of those that makes plenty of plays this upcoming year and maybe, just maybe, plays himself into that first round of the NFL draft. Moving on to Arizona, my biggest question here is, was losing Jedd Fisch bigger than keeping Noah Fifita? Because that's the biggest question when you're talking about last year. It was Jayden de Laura to start the season, then he wasn't playing quite well enough. Noah Fifita came in and did something that frankly shouldn't be capable of being done. This is a very young kid that was still learning that offense that jumped in and just tore people to pieces. So we know the physical ability is incredible. We know the arm talent's awesome. We know all of that is in place. We also know Jedd Fisch's offense is really incredible. We also know that he does a really good job of putting his quarterbacks in really good positions. So the question is, keeping Noah Fifita and Tatori McMillan was as big of a deal for Arizona as anything this offseason. Is that enough to make sure you get a repeat of what you had? Is the change in offensive coordinator going to be enough to really kind of change the way this team operates and change what Noah Fifita can do on the field? So I think it's one of those things that they did change the coaching staff. There's no doubt about that. But also, the coaching staff isn't dumb. They know what they saw last year. They know what he succeeded in, and I would be very surprised if it wasn't a very similar approach. I think it's going to be one of those that you just play to your player. You don't worry about what you like to run. You don't worry about what you're bringing into the job. You worry about what that guy likes to run. And if he can run just about anything. But at the end of the day, there's a world where there's a little bit of a sophomore slump because he doesn't have that guy calling plays. And it'll be a really interesting thing to watch, especially early on in the season. They play Kansas State. If things look a little bit out of whack in that game, maybe that's the reason. Maybe Noah Fafita isn't quite as comfortable in this offense as he was in the offense a year ago, and he'll likely develop into a fine player in that offense, but definitely something that could stumble Arizona early on, and maybe they can't recover towards the end of the season. Then Kansas to finish it off, and this question is very, very simple. Jalen Daniels, can you stay on the field? We have to ask this question just about every year, and it's been a negative question just about every year, but this is one that's obviously impossible to answer right now, and it's going to be a day-to-day nightmare for Kansas State fans, just hoping that they don't have any tough hits, hoping they don't see him on the ground after a play, and really hoping they don't see any tweet come across their page that says he's out for the season. He is a remarkably talented player, and one of those guys that we talk about players, or quarterbacks in particular, that have the most power over their team season. You know, if you lose this guy, you're in deep, deep trouble, whether it's Carson Beck or Cam Ward or Avery Johnson. This guy's right there. He might be the number one on that list, frankly, because this is a totally different team without Jalen Daniels on the field, and he's someone that totally changes the way that your team works. And it's not just the offense. It's not just he makes that offense more explosive and more dangerous. The defense plays harder when they see him on the field because he's a natural leader, because he brings so much energy, and because he's someone that not only can he bring energy to the offensive line, to the wide receivers, to the tight ends, he'll bring it plenty to the D-line and the linebackers and all of those guys, because he's not just the leader on the offense, he's the leader of this entire team. So seeing number 6 on the field is going to be huge for this team, and it sounds like they will for week 1, but beyond that, you just got to make sure that he is on the field, and cross your fingers, hold your breath, do whatever you got to do. But for Kansas to be successful this year, that guy's got to be on the field, and he's got to be on the field pretty much every single week. Maybe there's a little bit of leeway there somewhere in that schedule, but keeping him on the field is the number one priority, and if they can do that, then this is as dangerous of a team as there is really in the country. But also you got to figure out what that backup situation is going to be. Still kind of a fight there, but it's definitely something that you don't want to have to worry about those backups. I'll put it that way. So a ton of stuff happening around all of these programs. I mean, you get into fall camp, some new questions present themselves, and that was actually the one I used for Texas, figuring out what they're going to do with those running backs. How are they going to pull that off? So it's going to be a really, really interesting thing to watch, and absolutely love breaking these down, but we'll do our last segment on that tomorrow, round out the top 25, even dip a little bit below the top 25 for that one. But let's go into our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to do some fall camp intel. We're kind of wrapping up camp. There's a number of teams that are starting to kind of wind down, get into game week preparation, and there's a number of things that I want to update you on, just kind of grandiose things throughout camp that around some of the big teams in the country. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the lingering questions around the top 25 teams. We'll continue that and likely finish that out tomorrow, so definitely stay tuned for that. But let's get into some fall camp intel. We had a number of things happen over the last 24 hours even coming out of fall camp, and let's go ahead and jump in here because there is a ton to get to. But I want to start at LSU, and I've talked about this quite a number of times on these fall camp intels, but it is very worth repeating. Ashton Stamps is a real player. He is a dude, and he's someone that I understand, this LSU back end was not good last year. I understand it's one of those units probably across the country that we're worried about the most going into this year, but this kid is taking full ownership, and he's not just playing good coverage on the second and third string wide receivers. He's playing good coverage on Kyron Lacey, and that is a very special thing. Now, the problem is on the other side of the ball, it sounds like Sage Ryan is out right now. Doesn't sound like it's too severe and will be back for week 1, but J.K. Johnson is getting the run over at the other cornerback position. P.J. Woodland is also a freshman to watch there because he's been making some really, really good plays in practice, but overall, I think this unit's coming along a little bit better than I expected. I think they have more guys there than they thought they did, honestly, and I think it's not going to be a great unit by any means, but it's definitely going to be one that is going to be much improved from a year ago if I had to imagine. And then you got Kyle Parker. He is a wide receiver that has been making a ton of plays early on in his career, a freshman over there at LSU, and it's funny, this LSU wide receiver group, I like it a ton. I don't think they have a wide receiver 2. I think they have a wide receiver 1 in Kyron Lacey pretty obviously, but whether it's Adam Anderson or CJ Daniels or maybe Kyle Parker, it feels like they're kind of trying to fill that void. I think Adam Anderson is likely the guy to do it, but overall it feels like they have wide receiver 1s and then a ton of wide receiver 3s. It's not necessarily that that's a problem, but it's definitely going to be an interesting way for them to go about this offense this upcoming year. Moving on to Michigan, all of the answers, or all of the questions, that you had going into the fall camp for Michigan feel like they've been at least mostly answered. You obviously won't have all of the answers until they hit the field, but Alex Orji has taken over that job. He is going to be the starting quarterback. I don't think he's been officially named, but I'd be shocked if it was anyone else, at least for that first week matchup. So he's definitely someone that has done everything you wanted them to do, and that's a huge, huge thing because all you really needed them to do was be consistent passing the ball. So if he's doing that, then you got to feel pretty confident as you head into this season. It does sound like the back end of that defense is coming along. Makari Page is a guy that I think is going to make a number of different plays, but do have some turnover back there, especially with Rod Moore going down with an injury. They got some things to figure out, but it sounds like they're at least in okay shape as they head into this season, and we'll figure out exactly how they look against that in that Texas game in week 2. And then Jalen Hoffman is someone else that from the tight end position is making a number of plays for this team, and when you have all the tight ends that they have, it might be a little bit tough to get this guy in the game plan, but at the end of the day, maybe you line him up as a fullback and then leak him out for a pass or something like that. So definitely someone to watch. Maybe he doesn't make all the plays in the world, but maybe he makes that third or fourth down conversion that you need late in the season. But moving on to Alabama, again, the quarterback has taken over. Jalen Milroe is very, very comfortable in this offense, and everything seems to be rolling right along, and that is the last thing that a lot of people want to hear because the ceiling of this kid is out of this world. He can do so many incredible things in college this upcoming year, including kind of running away with the Heisman. Now, it's going to take him some time. I still think even if he's found a little bit of a groove in this offense, once you get in front of live reps and you have, 300-pound defensive linemen really running at you, you might have a little bit more to get used to. But at the end of the day, it sounds like he is right on schedule for where he wants to be, and that Wisconsin game in week 3 will definitely be one to watch to see just how far along he really is. LT Overton is another guy to watch here. He is starting to make some progress. He came over from A&M, a very, very talented player that went into college actually a year early, so is a little bit behind technically when you talk about his age comparative to where he's playing. So I think he's going to kind of blow up this year. It's kind of like his pseudo freshman year. So definitely something to watch there. A very, very talented guy, and frankly, I think he's going to be one of the linchpins of this offensive or defensive line. Then we move into the guy that I think is going to just be an absolute beast. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 at the end of the year. That is Ryan Williams, the freshman. I think this is a guy that is just beyond more talented than a lot of the guys in that room. I think a lot of the guys in that room are really incredible, but I think Ryan Williams is different. It's the same thing with the Clemson wide receiver room where I really like a lot of the guys in that room. Bryant Wesco is a little bit different, so I think that he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver at the end of the year. So I do think Ryan Williams might take a little bit of time to develop, and they'll have to find some other guys in the early weeks, but throughout the year, you're going to see much, much more of number 2 getting the ball and making some really special things happen on the outside. Moving over to Ole Miss, it sounds like Ole Miss has gotten into that part of the fall camp where it's just, let's stay healthy. Trey Harris, Antoine Wells are going to stay off the field at least for a little bit as they gear up for this upcoming season. So it sounds like they're right on schedule for where they want to be. And the biggest thing really to me is it sounds like the defense is outplaying the offense, which is a very, very interesting thing to hear from Ole Miss camp because obviously they transferred in so many incredible players and got so much better on that side of the ball. I did not think they were going to be this adept this early. And sometimes it's, the offense keeping it pretty vanilla. Sometimes there's some other things at play. But overall, you got to feel pretty confident if you're an Ole Miss fan in that defense. And if that defense comes along, the offense is not going to struggle. I can almost promise you that. And Sunshireen Perkins is one of the guys that they absolutely love on that defense. And it sounds like he's kind of sliding around a little bit, kind of playing that Harold Perkins type role where he's going to rush off the edge quite a bit, but maybe you drop him back into that linebacker position and he covers someone on the outside. This is likely the most athletic player on that entire team and definitely someone that is going to be an absolute beast in the coming years and probably this year, if I'm being honest. Moving on to Notre Dame, they have a couple of things coming up, and one of the guys that is really popping off the page as they get closer to that Week 1 matchup against A&M is Christian Gray, the cornerback that is going to be opposite Benjamin Morrison. This is one that Notre Dame reporters are just sky high on. They think he's going to be an incredible player, and frankly, that back end, if he is an incredible player, might just be the best in the country, right up there against Ohio State. So really, really talented kid, and making his very first start against A&M in a couple of weeks here. Cam Williams is also another guy to watch. He is a freshman wide receiver that can just go. He is a very, very speedy guy, and frankly, it's the same thing I talk about with Michigan. When you have an offense that is so run-heavy and struggles to get those wide receivers out and open and in space, when you have a guy that you can just get the ball in the hands of and watch him go, makes things a little bit easier. So I do think this is an offense that is coming along pretty nicely. I tend to believe that it's going to have to be a little bit of a defensive battle for that A&M game, and then they can kind of get that offense rolling. It's going to take a week, 2-3 weeks to kind of really get their feet under them, but that defense should likely be able to handle business while they do that. Moving over to Nebraska, I said yesterday that Dylan Raiola hasn't been named the starter, and he was named the starter just after I went off air. So he is the starter now. The true freshman is going to be the starter for Nebraska, and it's time. He is officially the savior of the program, and it's about to start. So definitely going to be as much pressure on him as you could possibly imagine, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he handles it. He seems like he's done everything you want him to do in fall camp, including taking care of the football at a really incredible rate. So definitely someone to watch, and that Colorado game in Week 2 is going to be quite the test for him. And then that back end looks outright incredible. I didn't mean to cut out Tommy Hill's face, I promise, but Tommy Hill is one of those guys that is a first-round NFL talent. You have Bly Hill once he's fully healthy. I think is going to be incredible on the other side of that defense. I think Isaac Gifford is a really talented player, and they are as deep as can be. So this defense overall is awesome. I think this back end, along with that D-line, is going to be just ridiculously deep this upcoming year. And then Tennessee, the back end is a worry for this team. Boo Carter has stepped into the role of Jordan Thomas after he went down. He is going to play that nickel cornerback, and as we talked about, that is a huge, huge position for a number of these teams that like to employ that 2-4-5 or 4-2-5 type defense where you have 5 DBs out there. That nickel is hugely important because he does so many different things. And we'll see what that freshman can do. But they returned some talent. They brought in some guys that are super important. And I think Wesley Walker is the guy to watch more than anyone. But it's still patchwork. It's still putting everything together and making sure it fits. And it's going to be definitely really tough to do. That's for sure. But it'll be something to watch as we get into the season. On the other parts of the defense, they're more than fine. Obviously, James Pierce Jr. on the front end, but Arian Carter at the middle of the defense is an absolute beast. He's someone that is going to make all types of tackles this upcoming year. Frankly, I'd be a little bit surprised if he didn't lead this team in tackles, and he's going to be an absolute monster throughout this year. And then Nico is one of those guys that you haven't heard a lot from, and frankly, that is a great thing for a first-year starter. When you're not hearing about him getting dominated by the defense or turning over the ball or struggling with reads, all of that doesn't seem to be a problem. So everything, no news is good news when you're talking about first-year starters, and Nico has very little news as of right now. Moving into Kansas, obviously the biggest news is Jalen Daniels is healthy. He is 100% healthy. He has been cleared for that first game. Now you just got to get through 12 more. So it's definitely going to be something to watch. It sounds like the backup quarterback battle is getting a little bit more intense. Cole Ballard and Isaiah Marshall are battling for that and could be very important players. We've seen Jason Bean step in a number of times, but he's off to the UFL. So you got to find someone else to step into that role. I tend to believe Cole Ballard will be the guy because he's been there for a number of years, but definitely something to watch as you get a little bit deeper into this fall camp and deeper into the season, of course. But also, a number of wide receivers have finally gotten healthy. I believe yesterday was the very first time that they had all three starting wide receivers on the field at the same time, and that is a crazy thing, but it sounds like everyone's good to go. Luke Grimm is the guy that I would watch for there, definitely someone that is very talented. And then the two worries that they had for this team were the O-line and kind of the D-line, but they love the D-line. It sounds like that is as deep as they've had in quite some time, and the O-line, it sounds like it's starting to put itself together, although they shifted around quite a bit early on. It sounds like they're starting to find their five. Then we got Rutgers. They had an injury that is really going to hurt them. Mohamed Toure is a very talented edge rusher linebacker that tore his ACL in preseason camp. He is going to be out for the year. This is a guy that tore his ACL back in, I believe, 2022, so he's been out for the year for 2 of the last 3 seasons, and he's a very, very talented player. Was one of those guys that was on the Buckhiss Award watch list, was all Big Ten selection in preseason, and was one of those guys that was just remarkably talented. He also won, or was semifinalist for Comeback Player of the Year a year ago. So this kid was going to be an absolute beast for them, and a huge loss for a team that really cannot take too many injuries right now. And then Texas made a very, I know that's a Kansas jersey, I am talking about Texas. Texas made a very interesting move late last night, pretty much. On Wednesday night, they added Velton Gardner, a running back that played at Kansas and SMU the last little bit. He is eligible to play because he is a grad transfer. He has kind of no rules for when he can kind of enroll and get going. So he is going to be the guy that kind of steps into a room that has had some depth issues come into play. I really like this pickup for a number of reasons. I think the biggest one for me is this is a 6th-year player. That means he is much further along in the pass pro way of things than some of those younger players in that running back room for Texas, and that's exactly what you need if you're Texas. Just a veteran guy that you can bring in on long third downs to pick up that extra linebacker or to pick up that blitzing safety. So definitely someone to watch. I think it'll likely be a kind of break glass in case of emergency type of situation early on, but he definitely could get onto the field, and he's a pretty special player out in open field, so it definitely will be very fun to watch to see just how much he really gets into that conversation. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So definitely check that out on the GSMC page, and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.